breakfast.
Good morning, and welcome to Comics for Breakfast. I'm your host, Jason MINK. This morning, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, we are going to deviate from our usual programming to present 26 comics that I am thankful for. Now, some of these books are new, some of them have been with me for years, but all occupy a special place in my collection. All images are scanned directly from the books that you see on screen. There's no camera trickery or occult means involved. With that, let's jump right in. We're going to start with Amazing Spider-Man number 259. Now, this might seem like a strange choice to some, as it's not the most notable story, but for me at the time, I was thankful to see Spidey back in the classic costume after months of sporting the black suit. There's some great writing here by Roger Stern and some very Ditko-esque artwork from Pittsburgh's own Ron Frenz. This issue remains a high point in the title for me. Now, if you've watched my videos with any regularity, you just know Archie and the gang are going to pop up, so let's get it out of the way right now. Here's a book I was pleased as punch to add to the archives. This is Archie Annual number 4 from 1953. Featuring art from Archie mainstays like Bob Montana, this big 116-page book is my oldest Archie to date. And what an iconic cover. It's a single image, but it tells the reader so much about what to expect on the inside. It's great that this book has managed to survive all of these years, and it holds a special place of honor in the archives. This is Black Cat number 57. So why am I so worked up about an old coverless comic, you might ask? Well, this is actually the first issue of Black Cat Mystery, the point where Harvey booted the Black Cat from her own title, turning the book from a superheroine adventure series to a weird suspense-style anthology. Outrageous, I know, but the company was doing whatever it could to keep the lights on. The story Pushin' Up Daisies is a high point of this issue for its lovely art and bittersweet tone, and was featured last year right here on Comics for Breakfast. Next up, here's Climax number 1 from July of 1955. While rips, chipping, and stains can negatively impact a comic's grade, they can also impart a sense of history, value, and purpose. Note the handwritten price of $3 in the letter M and the single initial one letter over. And how nifty is this sideways cover? It's an interesting book from an often overlooked time period. I'm a nut for pre-code horror comics, and I was blown away when I managed to land this lovely copy of Crime Does Not Pay number 52. Well, lovely might not be the right word for it. That is one blood-soaked cover. I think the additional red ink down here was the result of a printer's error, but it certainly adds to the visceral power. And hey, it's chock full of Charles Biro artwork. How can you go wrong? Next up, IW's I Dream of Love is a book I'm thankful for because it was my first exposure to Siegel and Schomburg's Jean Juan. You remember Jean? Chased from his homeland for being too sexy, frozen in a mysterious glacier only to revive decades later and thousands of miles away to rise and seduce anew. I'm sure that we can all relate. And who can forget Uma Guru and her fish? It's top-shelf stuff. I'm thankful for this copy of 8-Ball, as it's one of the only comics that I have that belong to my late friend Owen. Owen was a talented artist who sought out the unique and essential, sharing it with anyone who would listen, and several who didn't. Creator Dan Clow's wry and sardonic take on life was well matched to Owen's own, and this book never fails to give me a wry smile. Here's another book with a strong personal connection. This belonged to my buddy Dave, who gifted it to me before moving out of town. As teenagers, we strongly identified with the Freak Brothers, as should be obvious by this pick. It's great to have a book that we read as greasy teens in the archive, and it's always great to talk to Dave, who remains my best pal to this day. Next up, it's Tower Comics' Tippy's Friend Go-Go and Animal Number 13. Now, I'm a big fan of teen humor comics from the 1950s and 60s, and this remains one of my favorites. Snappy writing and great art that never fails to please. If only they weren't so danged hard to find. Seriously, I see the Incredible Hulk number 181 for sale far more often than these Go-Go comics. Who's holding out? Next up, here's Iron Man number 152, and I am very thankful to have this book in my collection. Many years ago, when we were both very young, I gave my brother this comic and a pile of others as a Christmas present. He wasn't all that into comics at the time, but I'm pleased to report that these books made him a fan for life. Here we are on the way to buy some Iron Man action figures way back in 1994. Although his original is long gone, I recently re-gifted him this issue and picked up a copy for myself as well, building on a history that has lasted for decades. No list like this would be complete without mentioning my all-time favorite romance comic. That is, of course, Heartthrobs number 132. Now, some folks say that you can't judge a book by its cover, but with a cover like this, well, the rest of the book is pretty much just an afterthought. DC mainstay Bob Oxner delivers one of the most emotionally wrought images ever to hit the newsstand. Power, pathos, and this pissy pair make for a knockout combination. Next up, here's a comic that's not a comic at all, but a collection. It's I Shall Destroy All of the Civilized Planets, featuring the work of infamous creator Fletcher Hanks. Hanks' brash, some might say ugly art style, combined with his abrupt and surreal scripts, produce fevered dreamlike tales with startling impact. The creator's nigh-biblical takes on morality and vengeance might be a bit rich for some, but I find his work immediate and absorbing in spite of its age and cultural distance. And hey, there's a second volume, too. Here's a really out-of-left-field title that you can be forgiven for having missed. It's Jack and Jill magazine from April of 1968, and it's strictly children's fare inside. But dig this cover. Ray Owings delivers this absolute charmer of an image, distilling the flower power of the previous summer of love into something gentle and sweet for the kids. This one never fails to please my jaded eyes. Another book that I'm thankful to have in the collection is JLA number 1 from January of 1997. While the passing of time and the overabundance of Justice League-themed product over the years have muted its impact somewhat, at the time this issue was like a bolt from the blue. Grant Morrison's powerful storytelling and Howard Porter's near-mythic representation of DC's big guns reinvigorated the team, upping the ante for future stories and placing the JLA squarely at the forefront of the DC universe. Now, I lost my first copy of this many years ago and was forced to make do with a trade paperback, but recently found all of these in the dollar bin. Next up, it's Journey into Unknown Worlds, number 27, and it's one of the few pre-Code Atlas comics I own, but it wears its distinction well. Dig this moody and magnificent cover from Harry Anderson, who offers up this slavering horror. Now, this is a comic that I'd seen online for years, but was only recently lucky enough to acquire. Haven't read it yet, but gotta say I'm looking forward to it. Another book that I'm thankful to have in my collection is Marvel Team-Up number 13. Now, this is kind of an odd book, as Spidey and Cap are written to have a very adversarial relationship here. It's a far cry from how the characters are represented today, but I have to say that I really like the intergenerational conflict between the no-nonsense Cap and the snarky, short-tempered Spidey. The fact that I can act this comic out with my action figures was a bonus then and now. Here's another that I'm thankful to have in the archive. It's Milk and Cheese. That's right, fun with Milk and Cheese. The Carton of Hate and the Wedge of Spite have made the list. Okay, sure, I have the floppies in my collection, but this is a book that I can lend to my kid and not sweat it. It collects all of the early issues in one handy-dandy trade. From Darth Vader to Merv Griffin. Not for the lactose or humor intolerant. Next up, here's this beauty from 1968, and it's Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. number 7. Now, this book was a gift from Adam Seagard, top OG, an all-around swell guy, featuring a Dolly-esque front cover by Steranko, as well as stunning interiors by Frank Springer. This is a classic issue that I am glad to have in the archive. Hey, Nick, Dick Tracy wants his overcoat back. Speaking of Nick Fury, it would be back here, wouldn't it? Speaking of Nick Fury, dig this copy of Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos number 3. This was a gift from OG Supreme, Matt Nichols. Now, Matt is a true treasure hunter when it comes to finding great books in the wild, and this one is no exception. Not only is it a sterling example of early Marvel Silver Age goodness, but it features an ad for a little upcoming comic called The Avengers, which may or may not catch on. And hey, you can't beat that Kirby cover. Next up, here's a book that's incredibly important to my evolution as a comics reader. Now, I didn't own this one as a kid, but an older boy who lived down the street did. I'd show up ostensibly to play with his younger brother, then end up badgering him to let me see this comic. It's the Spectacular Spider-Man Collector's Edition, featuring the Sinister Six from Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1. It was the first time that I had seen Steve Ditko artwork, and I was hooked. This was the comic that made me a webhead for life, and it remains a keystone of my humble collection. Next up, another comic I'm thankful for is this issue of Swing with Scooter. Yeah, it's that team humor I love so much, but the real story here is Mike Jones, who saw this and immediately knew that I needed it for the archive. Thanks to the Old Guys group, I've made many friends, but few are as bright, engaging, and fun to be around as Mike. He truly loves old comics, and his work in the medium speaks for itself. And he's also the go-to guy for all of your Dave Riordan sweet pain questions. Next up, here is a book that is absolutely wonderful to have in the collection. This is the first edition, only $5. I paid a little bit more, but it was well worth it. It's The Magnificent Superheroes of Comics Golden Age. Now, I had seen this book advertised for years in the little ads in the back of comic books. Not the big full-size ones, but, like the tiny little ones. This cover was recreated along with some text talking about the Hangman, Daredevil, the Shield, the Web, Captain Battle. And as a kid, all of those names sent my head spinning, and I would stare at this picture for hours. But my parents weren't really big on sending money through the mail, and subsequently, I never ended up with a copy of this book until last year. But I gotta say, super happy to have a copy of it. A little surprised, I have to say, if I was a kid, I would have been a little disappointed because the stories inside are not only black and white, but they're kind of sketchy as far as reproductions go. But hey, what are you gonna do, huh? It's the Magnificent Superheroes of Comics Golden Age, and, well, there's nothing else like it. Next up, it's Vicky number 1 from Atlas Comics. And if you're feeling a sense of deja vu now, well, that's because these are actually Tower's Tippy Teen characters with a new coat of paint. Seems Atlas was trying to cover all of the bases when it came to genres, even teen humor, and what better way than taking an 8-year-old comic, slightly rewriting and retouching the artwork, and then blasting it out for 1970s sensibilities. Now, this is a hard book to find, but it's essential for any Atlas collection. Now, I recently picked up this copy of Web of Evil, number 6, and am thrilled to add it to my other pre-code horror titles. Now, this is one of those books that I'd seen many times over the years, but never expected to be lucky enough to add it to the collection. I'm truly thankful for the opportunity to host such books and safeguard them until the next generation can come along and enjoy them. That goes a long way as a collector. Even if these books do get parted out to the four winds after my passing, well, at least I did my part to preserve their legacy. That's what it's all about, folks. We're going to wrap things up with a comic book that I am truly thankful not only to own, but be part of. That's right, it's the official comic of the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics. This is Yeet Presents. Now, I had mentioned Mike Jones earlier. Mike Jones is the publisher of Yeet Presents, and this is issue number 45. And Yeet has been going strong for a couple years now, and it just improves from issue to issue. This particular issue is phenomenal because it features a lot of great art and stories, including a six-pager from my own brother, Dennis Miller, and his story, The Town of Solace. And this is particularly cool because each one of these pages was illustrated by a different artist, and in the future, those pages will be auctioned off. So, if you're a fan of original comics art, or if you just like great comics in general, well, Yeet Presents is the comic for you. It's the best damn black and white anthology on the market today. And I'm not just saying that because there's a camera pointed at me. I'm Jason Mink. Thank you for joining me for this special episode of Comics for Breakfast. We'll be back to our regular programming next week, of course. If you enjoyed this show, please consider purchasing a mug, a t-shirt, or one of the other fine items that you can only find on the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics swag shop, which is right here at the link. Wrapping things up, I must say I am thankful for you, the viewer. You make it all possible, my friends. Otherwise, well, I'd just be sitting here in an empty room. I'm Jason Mink, and I'll see you next Sunday at breakfast. Closed systems.
I'm Jason Mink, and this is Having a Drink with Mink.
She found it, grabbed it from him, and ripped it in half, threw it in the dark.
Climax. Now, some of you ladies have never found this.
You know what? If you're looking for a good climax, I have it right here, folks. Come on down. Come on, ladies. These two things are completely unrelated, but they don't have to be.